In a world obsessed with appearances, where the spotlight often blinds us to true greatness, sometimes justice arrives not with a roar, but with a whisper that carries the weight of untold battles, the quiet strength of a true hero, and the undeniable truth that respect is earned, not demanded. What happens when a moment of casual cruelty collides with a lifetime of quiet sacrifice? You're about to find out. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The air in the luxury ballroom crackled with energy. Wedding photographers darted like hummingbirds, their cameras flashing, each click a punctuation mark in the grand symphony of celebration. Guests adorned in their finest clinked champagne glasses, their laughter a joyful, effervescent hum. At the center of this opulent whirlwind stood the bride, a vision in white lace, her smile as dazzling as the crystal chandeliers above. Every movement, every pose was meticulously choreographed, a perfect tableau for her perfect day. Her gaze swept across the room, approving, confident, until it snagged on a single, incongruous detail. Near the back, slightly apart from the throng, stood a quiet black man. His suit was simple, dark, and impeccably pressed, but it lacked the designer flair of the other guests. His posture was ramrod straight, his hands folded neatly behind him, a stillness in his demeanor that set him apart. He seemed intent on drawing no attention, on simply being a silent observer. But the bride's smile, so radiant just moments before, began to freeze. Her eyes, sharp and accusatory, locked onto him. A subtle tension rippled through her features. "Who is that?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the festive din, though it was intended only for her wedding planner, who stood nervously at her elbow. "He's in my background. Someone move him." The directive, though not shouted, carried an unmistakable authority. It pierced the celebratory bubble, and a sudden hush fell over the immediate vicinity. Conversations tapered off, heads turned. The festive chatter softened to a low murmur as guests sensed the shift in atmosphere. The tension in the air thickened, palpable and uncomfortable. The man, the object of her sudden ire, remained remarkably calm. Not a muscle in his face twitched. His gaze, steady and unwavering, met hers for a fleeting moment before he quietly, with an almost imperceptible nod, stepped a few paces to the side. His movement was fluid, graceful, executed with a quiet dignity that was impossible to ignore. He simply created space, removing himself from her frame as if acknowledging her request without acknowledging its rudeness. For a moment it seemed the crisis was averted. The bride, Heather, began to rearrange her veil, a hint of her triumphant smile returning. But the brief moment of quiet had only fueled her sense of entitlement. Her voice, now sharper, louder, carried clearly across the quieted section of the ballroom. "This is a private event, sir," she declared, her tone dripping with disdain. "Don't ruin my photos." A collective gasp rippled through the room. It was audible, a shared intake of breath as the guests reacted to the blatant disrespect. Some winced, others looked down, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. A few, caught off guard, glanced at each other, their expressions a mixture of shock and embarrassment. The groom, Ryan, who had been laughing with his groomsmen, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He saw the color rise in his mother's cheeks, a flush of indignation. He shifted uncomfortably, taking a hesitant step towards his new wife, a placating hand reaching out. "Heather, darling," he began, his voice a low, urgent murmur, attempting to soothe her, to temper the escalating situation. He knew this man, or at least he thought he did. He knew his father had invited him. But Heather, caught in the intoxicating glow of her wedding day and perhaps a few too many glasses of champagne, was beyond reason. Drunk on attention, fueled by the hushed silence that amplified her every word, she doubled down on her offensive. Her eyes raked over the man's simple suit, a sneer twisting her perfect lips. "Honestly," she scoffed, her voice rising in pitch, "you look like you're with the catering team. Did you even bother to change out of your uniform? Or is that your finest suit?" The barb was sharp, cruel, and entirely unprovoked. The implication was clear. He was an employee, an interloper, certainly not a guest. The insult hung in the air, thick and heavy. The man, Mr. Jackson, met her gaze again. His expression remained unreadable, a mask of profound composure. He offered no verbal retort, no angry outburst. Instead, he simply nodded once, a subtle, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. It was a gesture that defied interpretation for most. But for those who truly watched, it was a silent statement. A dismissal, not of himself, but of her. He accepted her mistaken identity, absorbed her insults, and yet remained utterly unshaken. In that profound stillness, a stillness that seemed to absorb the venom of her words without a ripple, the audience felt something powerful. A wave of unease, yes, but also a sense of unacknowledged strength emanating from the quiet man. He was not ashamed, not in the slightest. His calm was not a sign of meekness, but of an inner fortitude that transcended the petty slights of a self-important bride. She didn't realize who she was talking to, and that in itself was a story waiting to unfold. The silence in the ballroom now held a new weight, a silent anticipation of a truth yet to be revealed. The pristine, joyous veneer of the wedding had cracked, and through the fissure, a deeper, more profound narrative was beginning to emerge. Whispers started to snake through the ballroom like tendrils of smoke, curling around the edges of conversations that had died down. Some guests snickered, their amusement cruel and thoughtless, enjoying the public spectacle. Others, more sensitive, quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be deeply engrossed in their champagne flutes or the intricate patterns on the tablecloth. A wave of embarrassment washed over them, a vicarious shame for the bride's blatant display of arrogance. Ryan's mother, Mrs. Collins, a woman of quiet grace and strong moral fiber, watched the scene unfold with a deepening frown etched between her elegant eyebrows. Her gaze shifted from the imperious bride to the dignified figure of Mr. Jackson, her disapproval clear, though unspoken. She knew with a certainty that chilled her that this was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. Mr. Jackson, sensing his presence was now a distraction, a focal point for the wrong kind of attention, quietly made his way towards the back exit. He moved with a practiced economy of motion, his footsteps light, his departure as understated as his arrival. He simply disappeared, melting into the shadows, out of the opulent ballroom and into the cool, embracing darkness of the garden's moonlight. Among the catering staff, a young waitress named Ellie Green had witnessed the entire uncomfortable exchange. Ellie was new to this world of glittering extravagance, still finding her footing, but she possessed an unshakable moral compass. Her heart clenched as she watched the quiet man endure the bride's venomous words. The injustice of it all burned within her. Without a second thought, driven by an instinct she couldn't suppress, Ellie slipped out of the ballroom, leaving the clatter of plates and the clinking of glasses behind. She found him standing on a cobbled path in the moonlit garden, his silhouette stark against the glow. He stood perfectly still, gazing up at the sky, a profound solitude emanating from him. "Excuse me, sir?" Ellie's voice was soft, hesitant, almost a whisper against the gentle rustle of leaves. Mr. Jackson turned, his expression still calm, but a hint of surprise in his eyes. I just wanted to say," Ellie continued, gathering her courage. "You didn't deserve that. What she said. It wasn't right." She felt a flush creep up her neck, but her resolve held firm. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Mr. Jackson's lips. It was a brief, gentle lifting of the corners, a flicker of warmth in his otherwise stoic face. "Thank you, young lady," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle. "But don't worry about it, I've seen worse." The words hung in the air, heavy with untold history, with experiences that Ellie, in her young life, could only begin to imagine. "I've seen worse." It was a simple phrase, yet it carried the echo of countless battles, of hardships endured, of a strength forged in fires she would never know. He wasn't speaking of rude brides or cheap suits. He was speaking of something far deeper, far more profound. Inside the ballroom, the bride, Heather, oblivious to the ripples of discomfort she had created, was holding court with her bridesmaids. She tossed her head, her laughter a little too loud, a little too triumphant. "Honestly," she crowed, gesturing dismissively, "some people just don't understand boundaries. But I handled the situation, didn't I?" Her friends, a collection of equally self-absorbed individuals, giggled on cue, murmuring their agreement and admiration. The laughter inside the ballroom grew louder, more boisterous, a defiant cacophony against the quiet dignity that had just walked out. Ellie, still standing in the garden, watched the moon cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. She could hear the muffled sounds of the celebration filtering out from the ballroom. The distant laughter, the music, the general revelry. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just happened, something far more significant than a mere wedding spat. She felt a profound sense of unease, a premonition that the quiet man's words held a secret, a story far bigger than anyone inside that glittering ballroom could possibly comprehend. She stood there, a young woman caught between two worlds, standing unknowingly on the precipice of a truth that was about to shake the foundations of a perfect wedding and expose the hollowness beneath its dazzling surface. Later that night, long after the last champagne cork had popped and the final guests had departed, a quiet, unassuming guest room near the wedding venue held a stark contrast to the earlier opulence. James Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, the room's standard decor unremarkable, offering a stark simplicity. The only light came from a single bedside lamp, casting a warm, intimate glow on his hands. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached for a small, velvet-covered case he had placed carefully on the nightstand. It was an object of profound importance, a repository of memory and sacrifice. He opened it, the soft click echoing slightly in the silent room. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, rested a medal. Its intricate design, the rich bronze, the blue ribbon, all shimmered softly in the lamplight. It was the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration for valor. He gently lifted it, his thumb tracing the cool, smooth edge of the star. As his fingers brushed the metal, memories, vivid and visceral, flashed before his eyes. The searing desert heat, the choking dust that coated everything, the relentless, deafening roar of gunfire that seemed to tear the very air apart. He saw faces, young faces etched with fear and determination. He remembered the desperate pleas for help, the surge of adrenaline, the impossible choice he had made in a moment of pure, selfless courage. He remembered the men he had saved and the ones he couldn't. The weight of that medal in his hand was not just metal. It was a tangible link to a past that defined him, a past that still haunted his quiet moments. James Jackson was not at this wedding by chance, nor was he an uninvited guest. The groom's late father, Colonel Mason, had been his commanding officer, a man he respected deeply, a mentor and a friend. It was Colonel Mason who had nominated him for the Medal of Honor, who had recognized and championed his extraordinary bravery. Jackson had come to the wedding solely to pay his respects to the Mason family, to honor a man who had profoundly influenced his life. He had intended to do so quietly, without ceremony, a silent tribute in the background of a joyous occasion. But the humiliation, the casual cruelty of the bride's words, had unexpectedly reopened old wounds. It wasn't the personal slight that stung, not truly. James Jackson had faced far worse indignities on battlefields, had stared death in the face more times than he cared to count. What truly stung was the disrespect, the blindness to honor, the dismissal of something profound that he represented. It was the casual scorn for a life of service, for the quiet dignity of a man who had sacrificed so much. The ghosts of his past, the faces of his fallen brothers, roared back into his consciousness, their silent sacrifices demanding recognition. He stared at the gleaming medal, its facets catching the light. "Not for me," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion, though his face remained a study in quiet resolve. For them, for his fallen brothers, whose names were etched not only on memorials, but on his very soul. For the values they fought for, the honor they upheld. His calm, usually unshakable, had now shifted. It hardened into a quiet resolve. Some truths, he realized, must be seen, even by the blindest among us. The world, or at least a small corner of it, needed to understand the true cost of honor, the profound depth of character that sometimes walked among them unnoticed. He placed the medal back into its velvet case, the click of the latch final and resolute. The quiet man had made a decision. A truth was about to be revealed, not for personal vindication, but for something far greater, the preservation of dignity, the silent tribute to those who had paid the ultimate price. Ellie Green, back in her own small apartment, could not shake the images of the wedding. The bride's haughty sneer, the quiet dignity of Mr. Jackson, and his haunting words, "I've seen worse." They replayed in her mind, a discordant melody in the quiet of her night. She tossed and turned, her conscience a restless companion. The next morning, the nagging feeling intensified. Her supervisor, a harried woman named Brenda with weary eyes, had caught her looking preoccupied during their morning briefing. "Ellie," Brenda had warned, her voice low and firm, "I saw what happened yesterday. Just stay out of it. You want your job? Don't get involved. These people have power. You don't." Brenda's words were meant as a protection, a practical piece of advice in a world that often overlooked the quiet and the vulnerable. But for Ellie, it felt like a direct assault on her sense of right and wrong. She tried to heed the warning, to focus on her duties, but the image of Mr. Jackson's calm, wounded eyes kept flashing behind her eyelids. The injustice felt too raw, too profound to simply ignore. Later that day, during her break, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a deep sense of unease, she pulled out her phone. Hesitantly, she typed into the search bar, "Mr. Jackson, veteran." The results were immediate, overwhelming. An avalanche of images, articles, and videos flooded her screen. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. And then she froze. There it was. An image that sent a shiver down her spine, a profound shock washing over her. The very same man, Mr. Jackson, stood tall and proud, but this time he was in a pristine military dress uniform. His chest was adorned with a cascade of colorful ribbons and gleaming medals. He was saluting, his gaze fixed on a distant point, his posture radiating an almost impossible gravitas. Standing beside him, smiling, was the President of the United States. The caption below the image confirmed her growing suspicion. "Sergeant Major James Jackson, Medal of Honor recipient." Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of realization. It wasn't just a veteran. It wasn't just a medal. It was the Medal of Honor. The highest honor a soldier could receive. The man Heather Collins had so casually insulted, mocked, and dismissed as catering staff was a national hero, a legend, a living testament to courage and sacrifice. The full weight of what had transpired crashed down on her. Heather's arrogance, her cruel words, her utter blindness to the true nature of the man before her. It was an insult not just to Mr. Jackson, but to every soldier, every sacrifice, every act of quiet heroism that defined the very soul of the nation. In that moment, Ellie made her choice. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting Heather fired or making her suffer. It was about truth. It was about righting a wrong, about ensuring that dignity was restored, and that profound respect was given where it was so unequivocally due. She would tell the groom. Ryan, she felt, deserved to know. He had seemed uncomfortable, had tried to intervene. He needed to understand the true identity of the man his new wife had so carelessly shamed. The decision solidified within her, a quiet, unwavering resolve. She would be the catalyst, the spark that ignited a necessary reckoning. The next morning, the honeymoon suite at the luxurious hotel hummed with a different kind of energy. Heather Collins, the new bride, lounged in a cloud of silk sheets, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She was recounting the previous day's drama to her bridesmaids, who sat around her, sipping mimosas and hanging on her every word. Honestly, Heather declared, waving a dismissive hand, some people just don't know their place. But I handled that intruder, didn't I? Her tone was smug, triumphant. She preened, basking in the glow of their sycophantic laughter. He just stood there with that completely expressionless face, like a robot. I mean, who shows up to a wedding in a cheap suit and expects to blend in? I simply put him in his place. Her bridesmaids, equally self-absorbed and accustomed to Heather's brand of casual cruelty, tittered and agreed. "You totally did, Heather," one chimed in. "He had it coming," another added, stirring her mimosa. Their laughter, light and airy, filled the opulent room, a testament to their collective blindness. Just then, Ellie Green, the young waitress, entered the suite, pushing a trolley laden with a lavish breakfast spread. She navigated the crowded room, her movements careful, her mind still replaying the events of the previous day, the image of Mr. Jackson's Medal of Honor burning in her memory. She tried to appear nonchalant, professional, but her hands were clammy, her heart doing a nervous jig in her chest. As she reached the coffee table, carefully placing down a tray of delicate pastries, her phone, which she had been holding discreetly, slipped from her grasp. It clattered to the plush carpet, the screen flaring to life. And there, stark and undeniable for all to see, was the image Ellie had found the day before. Sergeant Major James Jackson, in his full-dress uniform, his chest ablaze with medals, standing proudly beside the president. The Medal of Honor, unmistakable in its prominence, gleamed on his chest. The room, so recently filled with the bride's boasts and her friend's sycophantic laughter, fell into an immediate, stunned silence. The clinking of a glass, the rustle of a silk robe, everything stopped. All eyes, including Heather's, were drawn to the bright screen on the carpet. One of the bridesmaids, a usually bubbly woman named Chloe, slowly leaned forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her voice was a hushed whisper, barely audible. "Wait, that's him?" she breathed, her gaze flickering from the phone screen to Heather's suddenly pale face. "The man from the wedding?" Heather, who had been mid-sip of her orange juice, froze. The glass hovered inches from her lips. Her eyes, usually so sharp and confident, were now wide with a dawning horror. Her perfectly made-up face drained of all color, turning a sickly white. A cold dread seeped into her, chilling her to the bone. She snatched the phone from the floor, her fingers trembling visibly. She stared at the image, her mind racing, desperately trying to construct a different reality. "This is fake," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to her earlier bravado. "It has to be. Someone photoshopped it. That's impossible." She scrolled frantically through the other images that had loaded, each one confirming the undeniable truth. More photos of Jackson in uniform, articles detailing his heroism, award ceremonies, commendations. A deep, unsettling unease settled in the room, heavy and suffocating. The laughter was gone, replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by Heather's ragged breathing. Her bridesmaids exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier amusement replaced by a chilling realization. They had all been there. They had all heard. They had all laughed. Heather didn't know it yet, but the careless arrogance she had displayed, the casual cruelty she had inflicted, had just lit a fuse. The truth, now laid bare on a dropped phone screen, was a powerful, unstoppable force. Her carefully constructed world of shallow triumphs and self-congratulation was about to explode, shattered by the quiet dignity of a man she had dismissed. The honeymoon was officially over. At the very same moment, miles away, in a more somber setting, the groom, Ryan Collins, sat at his desk, attempting to deal with the lingering paperwork from the wedding. The festive glow of the previous day had faded, leaving behind a subtle sense of unease. He couldn't shake the memory of his wife's harsh words or the quiet dignity of the man she had insulted. His mother's disapproving glance was also a fresh memory. He was distracted, a faint frown creasing his brow. Suddenly his phone, which lay silently on the desk, buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He glanced at it, hesitated for a moment, then answered, expecting it to be a belated wedding well-wisher, or perhaps a vendor with a forgotten detail. "Captain Ryan Collins?" a deep, resonant voice asked on the other end. The voice was calm, authoritative, carrying an unmistakable weight of command. Ryan stiffened. "Yes, this is he," he replied, a sense of formality instinctively creeping into his tone. The title, Captain, was always used with precision by those who truly held rank. "This is General Harper," the voice continued, unwavering. "Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Ryan felt a jolt of pure shock, a cold wave washing over him. General Harper? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs? Why on earth would he be calling him? His mind raced, grasping for an explanation. Had something happened? Was it a military matter? His civilian life felt a million miles away from such a high-ranking military figure. "General Harper, sir," Ryan stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. "To what do I owe the unexpected call?" The general's voice remained cool, almost detached, yet with an undercurrent of something unreadable. "Sergeant Major James Jackson," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "wanted me to personally congratulate you on your marriage, Captain." Ryan felt his stomach plummet, a sickening lurch that left him breathless. The air seemed to leave his lungs. James Jackson, the quiet man, the man his wife had publicly ridiculed, the man his father had held in such high esteem, Sergeant Major, and General Harper was calling him to convey congratulations on behalf of him? The full, horrifying realization hit him like a physical blow. This was no ordinary man his wife had insulted. This was not some anonymous wedding crashers. This was a man of immense significance, a figure of profound respect whose name resonated even in the highest echelons of military power. The general himself was making a courtesy call, a veiled message, a demonstration of the quiet man's reach and standing. "Sir, I didn't know," Ryan stammered, his voice barely a whisper, thick with shock and a dawning sense of dread. He truly hadn't known the extent of Mr. Jackson's prominence. He had simply known his father respected him. He knew now that his wife had committed a grave, irreparable error. General Harper's reply was delivered with quiet finality, a statement that carried the weight of profound truth. "Few ever do, Captain." The call ended. The line went dead. Ryan slowly lowered the phone, his hand trembling. He stared at the blank screen, the silence in the room suddenly oppressive. The casual disrespect shown by his wife was not just a social faux pas. It was an insult of national proportions. The general's call was not a congratulation. It was a quiet, devastating confirmation of the monumental error that had just been made. Heather's perfect wedding had just unleashed a force far beyond her comprehension, a quiet storm that was about to break. And Ryan, unfortunately, was now caught in its destructive path. The fuse, lit earlier by a dropped phone, was now burning rapidly, and the explosion was imminent. A few days later, a stark, elegant envelope arrived at the newly established Collins home. It wasn't a thank-you note, nor another wedding announcement. Its thick, cream-colored paper felt substantial, important. On the back, embossed in a deep, authoritative gold, was a formal military seal. It was unfamiliar to Heather, but Ryan recognized it instantly, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. Inside, there was a single page, formal and concise. The elegant script, almost old-world in its precision, announced, "You are cordially invited to attend the dedication of the Mason Memorial Wing, honoring the men who served under Colonel Mason. Hosted by Sergeant Major James Jackson." Ryan read the words aloud, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Heather, who had been idly flipping through a fashion magazine, scoffed. "Oh, please," she drawled, barely glancing up. "Another one of those boring veteran things? Seriously? After what happened, you think I'd want to go near that man?" Her face twisted into a sneer at the memory of the wedding incident. "He probably just wants to publicly humiliate me again." Ryan slammed his hand on the table, the unexpected force making Heather jump. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "Heather," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "this is not another veteran thing. This is a memorial for my father's men. And it's hosted by Sergeant Major James Jackson, the man General Harper just called me about." He stood up, pacing the room, his agitation palpable. "We are going. This isn't a request. This is an imperative. My father respected this man more than almost anyone. And I know what happened at the wedding was unacceptable. This is our chance to try and make amends." Heather, however, remained stubbornly defiant. "Amends for what? For telling someone they were in my shot? Ryan, you're being ridiculous. I'm not going to be paraded around like some villain at his little ceremony. What do you think, he's going to make a speech about me?" She laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. But then her eyes landed on a detail Ryan had overlooked, a small line at the bottom of the invitation. It was the RSVP list, a carefully curated selection of names, not of personal friends, but of powerful figures. She snatched the invitation from his hand, her eyes scanning the list with growing alarm. General Maxwell, Senator Thompson, CEO of Sterling Aerospace, Mr. Davis, State Governor Eleanor Vance. The names were a roll call of influence, power, and prestige. These were not local dignitaries or small-town politicians. These were figures of national importance, individuals whose presence commanded respect and attention. Her defiance began to crack, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Wait," she whispered, her voice losing its earlier bravado. Her eyes darted from name to name, her mind slowly comprehending the scale of the event. "This isn't just some small gathering. This is huge." She realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach that she had gravely miscalculated. This wasn't a humble memorial. This was a significant event, a powerful assembly of influential people, all gathered to honor a man she had so casually dismissed. Her arrogance had blinded her, preventing her from seeing the true weight of Mr. Jackson's standing. This wasn't an event she could simply ignore. It was an event she had to attend, lest she risk further, far more damaging repercussions for herself and, by extension, for Ryan. The invitation wasn't just a summons. It was a subtle, yet undeniable demonstration of power. A power wielded not with force, but with quiet, absolute authority. The Grand Veterans Hall buzzed with a different kind of energy than the wedding ballroom. Here there was a palpable sense of reverence, of shared history, and quiet pride. The room was packed, a sea of uniforms, both active duty and retired, punctuated by the sharp suits of politicians and the polished attire of corporate leaders. Camera crews from various news outlets moved discreetly, their lenses poised, ready to capture the unfolding event. The atmosphere was formal, expectant, charged with a profound sense of purpose. Ryan and Heather Collins arrived, their entrance far from the triumphant fanfare of their wedding day. Ryan looked visibly ill, his face pale and drawn, a grim line set to his mouth. He moved with a stiff, almost robotic gait, every step an act of conscious effort. Heather, usually so eager to be the center of attention, was doing the exact opposite. She clutched Ryan's arm, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed slightly, trying desperately to blend into the periphery, to become invisible in the crowd. Her usual carefully constructed facade of pride was visibly cracking, crumbling under the weight of her growing apprehension. They found seats towards the back, hoping to avoid drawing any unwanted notice. Heather fidgeted, her eyes darting nervously around the room, acutely aware of the uniforms, the medals, the quiet power emanating from every corner. Then, a hush fell over the hall. All eyes turned to the stage. Across the polished wooden platform, a figure stepped into the spotlight. It was James Jackson. But he was not the quiet, simply suited man from the wedding. This was a man transformed, not in essence, but in presentation. He was in full military dress uniform, a crisp, dark blue, tailored to perfection. His posture was as straight as a sentinel, his shoulders broad, his head held high. His chest, which had been so unassuming at the wedding, was now a dazzling display of military prowess and sacrifice. A cascade of colorful ribbons, each representing a campaign, a commendation, a lifetime of dedication, adorned his uniform. And prominently, breathtakingly gleaming at the very center, was the Medal of Honor. Its distinctive blue ribbon and five-pointed star caught the stage lights, shimmering like a beacon. A wave of respectful applause, deep and sustained, swept through the hall. Everyone, from the lowest-ranking private to the highest-ranking general, rose to their feet as one, a unified show of profound respect. The sound was deafening yet solemn, a thunderous acknowledgement of a true hero. Heather froze mid-step, her hand still clutched to Ryan's arm. The color drained from her face, leaving her ghost white. Her jaw went slack, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and sickening recognition. "That's him," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a ragged gasp of disbelief. "The man from the wedding." Her hands, which had been gripping Ryan's arm so tightly, now began to tremble uncontrollably. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. The carefully constructed world she had inhabited, the one where she was always the most important person in the room, was shattering around her. The man she had ridiculed, mocked, and dismissed stood before her, not as a humble servant, but as a giant among men, his honor undeniable, his presence commanding. The hall lights continued to gleam off his Medal of Honor, each glint a stark, unforgiving spotlight on her own ignorance and arrogance. The reckoning had begun. James Jackson walked to the podium, his steps measured and deliberate. The thunderous applause slowly subsided, replaced by a profound, expectant silence that permeated every corner of the vast hall. His presence alone commanded attention, a quiet authority that needed no shouting to make its impact felt. The stage lights cast a soft glow on his face, revealing eyes that held both the wisdom of age and the deep, enduring pain of memory. He began to speak, his voice a calm, deep rumble, yet possessing a power that filled the entire hall without effort. It was a voice that had delivered commands in the chaos of battle, a voice accustomed to being heard, to being obeyed. He spoke not of himself, but of others, of the men who had served under Colonel Mason, the men who had paid the ultimate price. "We gather today," he began, his gaze sweeping across the sea of uniforms and faces, "to honor those who gave everything, to remember the selfless acts, the quiet courage, the unwavering commitment to duty." He spoke of humility, not as a weakness, but as the true hallmark of strength. He spoke of service, of putting something greater than oneself above all else. He spoke of the fallen, their names echoing softly in the silence, their sacrifices etched into the very fabric of the nation. And then his voice, though still calm, sharpened, gaining an edge that cut through the air like glass. "And sometimes," he said, his eyes now seeming to pierce the very souls of those listening, "the true measure of a person's honor isn't seen in uniform or in medals. It's seen in how they treat a stranger, how they treat someone they might mistakenly believe to be lesser. Because true honor, true dignity, shines brightest not when it is recognized, but when it is freely given, without expectation, without judgment." The words hung in the air, potent and undeniable. There was no need for names, no need for accusations. Every single person in that hall, especially those who had been at the wedding, knew exactly what he was referring to. The message was clear. delivered with a quiet, devastating power that no angry outburst could ever achieve. His grace, his profound dignity, was his revenge. It was a silent, unassailable triumph. The camera crews, understanding the significance of the moment, zoomed in. Their lenses found Heather Collins, still seated in the back row, her face frozen in a mask of utter horror. Her eyes were wide, vacant, staring blankly at the man on the stage. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her ghostly pale. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, were shaking uncontrollably, a tremor that ran through her entire body. The cameras lingered on her, capturing every nuance of her crumbling composure, every flicker of dawning shame. Jackson concluded his speech, not with a flourish, but with a simple, heartfelt, "Thank you." And then, as if on cue, the entire audience rose to its feet. Not just the uniformed personnel, but every single person in the hall. A thunderous standing ovation erupted, far louder, far more heartfelt than the earlier applause. It was a roar of appreciation, of respect, of profound gratitude for a man who embodied everything that was noble and honorable. Heather, unable to bear the weight of 1,000 invisible gazes, covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Tears, hot and mortifying, began to stream down her cheeks, soaking into her trembling fingers. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. She wanted to disappear. But there was no escape. The truth, delivered with such elegant, crushing dignity, had found its mark. Her carefully constructed world, built on shallow pride and unearned confidence, was not merely cracking. It was shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The quiet man, with his quiet words, had silenced the room, and in doing so had exposed the hollowness of her own character for all the world to see. Within hours, the story exploded online. A single phrase, "Bride insults Medal of Honor recipient," became a nationwide trending topic, a digital wildfire consuming social media platforms. News outlets, sensing the seismic shift in public interest, immediately picked up the story. Jackson's powerful, understated speech at the Mason Memorial Wing dedication was played on repeat, his calm, commanding voice echoing across television screens and laptop speakers throughout the country. The footage of Heather Collins's horrified, tear-streaked face, captured by the ubiquitous cameras, went viral instantly, juxtaposed against the unwavering dignity of Sergeant Major Jackson. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Social media platforms erupted with outrage. How could she? The disrespect! She needs to be held accountable. The comments poured in, a torrent of condemnation. People connected the dots with astonishing speed, remembering the initial vague reports of a wedding spat. Now, with the full context laid bare, the magnitude of Heather's actions became undeniable. The consequences for Heather were immediate and devastating. Her carefully cultivated influencer brand, built on a foundation of contrived perfection and shallow endorsements, began to crumble. One by one, her corporate sponsors, keen to distance themselves from the burgeoning scandal, pulled out of their lucrative brand deals. A prominent luxury fashion brand, a major income stream for Heather, released a terse statement. "We believe in respect and honor. We have terminated our contract with Ms. Collins effective immediately." Her PR job, the very profession she boasted about mastering, was next. Her company, a large, well-known agency, could not afford the public relations nightmare she had created. A somber email arrived, followed by a terse phone call from HR. She was fired. Jaws dropped across social media as the public watched Heather's meticulously crafted world collapse in real time. The very image she had sought to protect, the perfect bride, was now irrevocably tarnished, replaced by the image of a cruel, arrogant woman who had publicly shamed a national hero. Meanwhile, Ellie Green, the young waitress who had shown Mr. Jackson kindness, found herself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight. A journalist tracking down the story discovered her simple act of empathy. Her humble apology to Mr. Jackson, her quiet search for the truth, and her brave decision to inform Ryan were all brought to light. She was praised as the waitress who stood up for respect, a beacon of decency in a morally bankrupt situation. Offers of scholarships, better jobs, and public recognition poured in. The moral balance had shifted dramatically, decisively. Heather's world, built on the fragile edifice of superficiality, had not collapsed because Jackson had sought revenge. He had remained dignified, silent, and true to his character. It collapsed because truth, when illuminated, found its own powerful voice. And that voice, amplified by millions, had spoken with an undeniable clarity, exposing the profound cost of disrespect and the enduring power of true, unadorned honor. She had sought to dismiss a hero. Instead, she had revealed herself, and the world had seen. Weeks turned into months. The dust of the public storm had largely settled, but the echoes of the scandal still resonated. Heather Collins, once a rising star in the influencer world, was now a pariah, her name synonymous with shame and arrogance. She had lost everything: her career, her public standing, and a significant portion of her self-respect. The constant glare of public judgment had forced her into a painful, unwanted introspection. One quiet afternoon, a letter arrived at James Jackson's unassuming home. It was addressed in a hesitant, almost childish script, the paper slightly crumpled, clearly handled many times. Inside, the single sheet was filled with Heather's looping handwriting, the ink smudged in places, testament to the tears that had undoubtedly fallen upon it. It was a letter of apology. Not a public statement crafted by a PR team, but a raw, heartfelt confession, born from the crucible of profound suffering and shame. "Dear Mr. Jackson," the letter began, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I had to write. The woman who stood in that ballroom, who said those cruel things to you, I hardly recognize her anymore. I was so caught up in myself, in what I thought was power. I thought power was in being seen, in commanding attention, in being admired. I see now that true power is in being honorable, in humility, in treating every person with the dignity they deserve, regardless of their perceived status." Her words detailed the agony of her downfall, the painful lessons learned, the crushing weight of public scorn. "I realize now the depth of my ignorance, the magnitude of my disrespect. You were a hero, a man who sacrificed everything, and I saw only an inconvenience. I am truly deeply sorry for the pain I caused you, and for the insult I inadvertently inflicted upon all who serve. I hope one day you might find it in your heart to understand, if not to forgive." Jackson read the letter slowly, his expression unreadable. He could sense the genuine remorse, the profound shift in her understanding. It wasn't an easy letter to write, nor to receive. He folded it carefully, placing it back in its envelope. A few days later, without fanfare, Jackson drove to a modest address he had found for Heather. He knocked on the door. Heather, pale and thin, answered, her eyes widening in disbelief and a fresh wave of shame upon seeing him. "Mr. Jackson," she whispered, her voice cracking. He offered no lecture, no recrimination. His gaze was steady, compassionate, devoid of judgment. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice calm, "I received your letter." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, bracing herself for the condemnation she felt she deserved. Instead, he simply nodded. "We all fight battles, Miss Collins," he said, his voice soft, almost paternal. "Some on distant fields, some within ourselves. Yours just happened in public. What matters is what we learn from them." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "And what we do next." He offered her no easy path, no false promises. He didn't tell her everything would be okay. He simply acknowledged her pain, her journey, and her burgeoning understanding. He left her standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, but with a profound, undeniable sense of lightness in her chest. A burden, carried for too long, had finally begun to lift. Forgiveness, he knew, was not always a grand pronouncement. Sometimes it was a quiet understanding, a simple acknowledgement of shared humanity in the face of fallibility. And in that quiet exchange, a new seed of hope, fragile but real, was planted in the desolate landscape of Heather's ruined life. The final scene returned to the solemn beauty of the Mason Memorial Wing. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through the large windows, illuminating the polished stone and the names etched into the memorial wall. James Jackson stood before it, his gaze resting on the engraved names of his fallen brothers. Each name was a story, a life, a sacrifice. He spent a moment in silent communion, a quiet tribute to the men he had served alongside, the men whose honor he carried with such unwavering grace. The Medal of Honor, though not worn at this quiet moment, remained etched in the collective consciousness of those who knew him, a symbol of profound bravery and sacrifice. As he turned to leave, a gentle voice called his name. "Mr. Jackson?" Ellie Green approached, her smile warm and genuine. She carried a bouquet of fresh, fragrant flowers, a vibrant splash of color against the solemn backdrop. "These are from Ryan's mother, Mrs. Collins," she explained, her voice soft. "She wanted to thank you for everything." Jackson accepted the flowers, his eyes meeting Ellie's. There was a mutual understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the journey they had both taken, albeit on different paths. "She said," Ellie continued, her voice imbued with heartfelt sincerity, "that you not only restored dignity to their family, but that you reminded everyone of decency itself, of what true honor really means." She spoke not just for Mrs. Collins, but for all those who had witnessed the quiet strength of James Jackson. Jackson simply nodded, a faint, contented smile gracing his lips. He understood the profound truth in her words. It wasn't about personal glory or public recognition. It was about something far more fundamental: the enduring power of respect, the unwavering belief in the inherent dignity of every human being. The narrator's voice, now imbued with a timeless wisdom, closed the story, its words echoing with profound moral weight. Respect costs nothing, yet it reveals everything. It is a simple gesture, a fundamental acknowledgement of another's worth. Yet, in its presence or absence, it lays bare the very soul of a person. The world may clamor to honor medals, to celebrate titles, to chase after fleeting fame. But the real test of character, the true measure of a person's honor, is not found in the accolades they receive, but in the quiet, unassuming way they treat those they might mistakenly take for granted, those they might wrongly perceive as less. For it is in those moments of unvarnished interaction, stripped of status and pretense, that true humility and true greatness truly shine through. The camera slowly faded out, leaving the final image on screen. The Mason Memorial Wing, serene and resolute, and in the morning sun, a single, brilliant gleam reflecting off the polished bronze of the Medal of Honor, a silent, enduring testament to the quiet power of honor. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.